It was supposed to be a quiet night on Titan 9. The base slept under the dim orange light of Saturn's rings, a glow that turned the snow into molten amber. The hum of generators was the only sound across the frozen valley. Inside the barracks, Corporal Mason Ward stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between power surges. He couldn't sleep. Something felt off. The air was too still. Even the wind had gone silent, like the whole moon was holding its breath. Then, the alarm screamed. Red lights cut through the darkness as soldiers stumbled from their bunks. Incoming breach, someone yelled through the comms. Mason grabbed his rifle and ran for the outer gate, boots slamming against metal grates. Through the reinforced window, he saw the sky, split apart in white fire. A streak of light plunged through the upper atmosphere, glowing brighter than the sun. "Not a meteor," shouted Lieutenant Hargrove. "It's burning too slow." The ground shuddered. The sirens grew wild. Mason barely had time to duck before a shockwave tore through the compound, throwing him off his feet. The lights flickered, then died. For a moment, there was only static and darkness. When Mason's vision returned, half the outpost was gone. The comms tower leaned at a broken angle. He could taste iron in the air, blood and smoke. He raised his rifle, scanning the field, and that's when he saw movement in the haze. Something tall. Something wrong. The figure walked through the smoke as if the storm didn't touch it. It wore black armor that rippled with faint blue light. Its head was smooth, almost featureless, except for two burning eyes that cut through the dust like twin stars. "Contact!" Mason shouted, firing. The bullet sparked harmlessly off the creature's armor. It tilted its head slightly, as if curious. Then, in a blink, it was gone. The next thing Mason felt was a crushing force around his throat. He was lifted off the ground, choking. The alien's hand, cold and metallic, held him effortlessly. Its voice, if it could be called that, was a deep vibration inside his skull. "Human soldier, you are alive. Good." Mason tried to swing his rifle, but the alien flicked its wrist. A pulse of blue energy rippled through him, and everything went black. When he woke, the world was humming. The air smelled of metal and oil. He was lying on a narrow slab, wrists bound by glowing cuffs. The room was dim, the walls pulsing faintly like the inside of a living machine. A rhythmic vibration filled the air. Engines. He was aboard a ship. Across from him stood the same figure. The alien spy. A Zyrakian. They were the ghosts of the war. Creatures bred for infiltration, silence, and precision. Most humans never saw one up close and lived to tell about it. This one stood motionless, studying him. Mason forced himself upright, straining against the cuffs. "Go ahead," he muttered. "Do whatever you came to do." The alien didn't move. Then, slowly, its head tilted again. "You are not afraid." Mason spat blood onto the floor. "I'm too tired for fear." The Zyrakian circled him once, footsteps silent on the metallic floor. Its armor shifted like liquid metal, responding to unseen commands. When it stopped, its eyes dimmed slightly. "You fought," it said, "even when you knew you would lose." "Yeah," Mason growled. "That's kind of what we do." The alien's gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Mason could see faint scars beneath the armor, burn marks, almost human. Then the creature moved closer, its presence heavy and electric. It raised a slender device to Mason's temple. A flash of light burned behind his eyes. Images flickered through his mind. Battlefields, flames, faces. The alien was inside his memories. Mason screamed through gritted teeth. After a few seconds, the light faded. The alien stepped back, frowning. "You resist, even inside your mind. Your species fascinates me." "Glad we're entertaining," Mason said through clenched teeth. The alien ignored the remark. "Tell me something, human. Why fight when surrender would spare you pain?" Mason stayed at him, breathing hard. "Because if you stop fighting, you stop being human." For the first time, the alien hesitated. Its armor dimmed, pulsing faintly with what looked like confusion, or maybe doubt. Then, without a word, it turned away, walking toward the door. "Hey!" Mason shouted. You got a name, or do I just call you Blue Eyes? The alien paused. Names are for those who wish to be remembered. The door hissed open, flooding the room with cold light. Sleep, human, the alien said quietly. You will need strength for what comes next. The door closed, leaving Mason alone in darkness again. He leaned back against the cold metal wall, trying to steady his breathing. Every sound echoed. The hum of the ship, the faint pulse of alien machinery, the distant thrum of footsteps above. Somewhere out there, the fleet was probably looking for him, or writing him off as dead. He stared at the ceiling. Not dead yet, he thought. Then, through the silence, a soft sound reached his ears. A voice. Small. Human. Hello. Mason froze. It came again, weak, trembling. Is someone there? He looked around, heart pounding. The voice was coming from the wall beside him. He pressed his ear to the metal. Who's there? Mason whispered. A pause. Then a tiny voice replied, My name is Ella. Please, don't let them take me. Mason's blood ran cold. There was a child on this ship. As the engines rumbled and the walls glowed faintly blue, Mason sat in the dark, chained and helpless. Somewhere out there, the alien spy was watching him, studying him. And for the first time since the war began, Mason wondered if his enemy wasn't as loyal to the Empire as he seemed. Because no true Zyrakian would spare a human child. The hum of the alien ship never stopped. It pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat, a constant reminder that Corporal Mason Ward was deep inside enemy space, alone, trapped, and powerless. He had counted the seconds since the alien, the Zyrakian spy, had left. He wasn't sure how long it had been, hours, maybe a day. There was no clock, no sunlight, only that cold blue glow from the walls. But the voice he heard earlier still echoed in his mind. A child. He pressed his ear to the metal again, straining. The faint voice came back, trembling. Are you still there? Yeah, Mason whispered. I'm here. I'm scared, the voice said. They took everyone away. I think they are dead. Mason closed his eyes. What's your name, kid? Ella, she said. I was on a ship going to the Vega colony. Then they came. They took us. Mason's throat tightened. He remembered the news reports. A civilian transport lost 6 months ago near Zyrakian space. No survivors found. Until now. Listen to me, Ella, he said quietly. I'll get you out. You hear me? I promise. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a whisper. You're human, aren't you? Yeah, human, Mason said. And you're not alone. He waited for a response, but suddenly the door hissed open. A cold light spilled into the cell. Mason turned his head, blinking against the brightness. The Zyrakian spy entered, the same tall figure with blue, glowing eyes. He carried a tray with something that looked like food, gray paste and a small container of water. Eat, the alien said, placing it on the table near Mason. Mason didn't move. What do you want? The alien paused, his voice deep and calm. To understand you. Mason frowned. Understand me. You captured me, burned my base, probably killed my squad. And now you want a talk show? The Zyrakian tilted his head, unbothered. Your species fascinates me. You fight even when logic says to surrender. You protect even when protection brings death. Why? Mason met his gaze. Because some things are worth dying for. The alien's armor pulsed faintly, like it was reacting to his words. You mean loyalty? Call it what you want, Mason muttered. But we don't quit. The Zyrakian stood silent for a moment, then turned slightly, as if listening to distant voices through a hidden comlink. Mason noticed it, a subtle shift in the alien's posture. Tension. Hesitation. What are they saying? Mason asked. The alien's voice was low. Orders. What kind of orders? The blue eyes flickered. None that concern you. But Mason saw it. Something in the alien's face changed. For the first time, there was conflict. Hours passed. Mason pretended to sleep while watching the faint shimmer of blue light leaking under the door. At some point, it dimmed, and the door hissed open again, softer this time. The Zyrakian entered, moving quietly, carrying something small. Mason squinted. It was a cup of water, not for him. The alien stopped by the far wall, pressed a panel, and a hidden compartment opened. Inside, a small figure moved. A child. Ella. Mason's heart stopped. She looked weak, pale, her hands trembling as she reached for the cup. The Zyrakian knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. His voice softened, almost gentle. Drink. Slowly. Mason watched, stunned. The Zyrakian, a spy bred to kill, was helping her. The alien turned suddenly, sensing Mason's eyes on him. You were not supposed to see this. You're hiding her, Mason said. Why? The Zyrakian's blue eyes dimmed. Because my kind would erase her without thought. Mason leaned forward. So you do have a heart under that armor. The alien ignored the insult, glancing at the doorway like someone might enter at any moment. If they discover her, I will be executed. Then why risk it? Mason asked. The alien hesitated. Because, he said slowly, your kind shows something I do not understand. You fight for each other, even when there is no gain. You protect your young. You die for strangers. My people do not do this. We obey. We survive. Nothing more. Mason stared at him, trying to read his expression through that shifting blue armor. What's your name? The alien looked at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, Chiral. Chiral, Mason repeated. If you really care about that kid, then help me get her out. Chiral's eyes brightened, then dimmed again. I cannot. I'm watched. Every corridor, every breath. Then find a way, Mason said. You a spy, right? You know how to dissipate. Chiral didn't answer. His gaze shifted toward Ella, who had fallen asleep clutching the cup. Humans, he said softly, you never stop demanding the impossible. Maybe that's why we're still here, Mason said. For the first time, Chiral gave what might have been a smile, not with his mouth, but in the faint upward curve of the light across his faceplate. He closed the panel, sealing the compartment again. Then, standing straight, he said, do not speak to her again. If they hear voices, she dies. So will you. Understood, Mason said, though his voice trembled with quiet rage. Chiral walked toward the door, but Mason called after him. Hey, what happens to us now? Chiral paused, his back to the human. An order came today, he said, voice heavy. All human prisoners are to be terminated at dawn. Mason's stomach dropped. You're joking. Zyrakians didn't joke. Why tell me this? He demanded. Chiral's voice was barely a whisper now. Because you should know the hour of your death. And because, he hesitated, I am not sure I will let it happen. Then the door hissed shut, leaving Mason in silence once again. He sat there, staring at the place where Chiral had stood, heart pounding. He didn't understand it. The alien's tone, his hesitation, the strange glimmer in those blue eyes. Zyrakians didn't feel pity. They didn't protect children. They didn't warn humans of death. But Chiral had done all three. Mason lay back, staring into the dim light, a plan already forming in his mind. If Chiral had doubts, even small ones, Mason would use them. He didn't care what it took, because as long as that little girl was still breathing, he wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The ship drifted through black space like a ghost, silent except for the low hum of alien engines. In the prisoner deck, Corporal Mason Ward sat in the dark, every muscle tense. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. Chiral's words kept replaying in his head. All human prisoners are to be terminated at dawn. Mason didn't know when dawn came in deep space, but he knew one thing. Time was running out. He strained at the cuffs again, metal biting into his wrists. The bindings hummed with faint energy, impossible to break. But he wasn't thinking about escape. Not yet. He was thinking about Chiral, an alien spy showing mercy. It didn't make sense. Zyrakians were engineered for obedience, cold, efficient, unfeeling. Yet this one had fed a human child, hidden her, and warned a soldier about his own death sentence. Something was breaking inside Chiral, Mason thought, and that small crack might be the only way out. Far above, on the command deck, Chiral stood before a holographic projection of his superior, Commander Vorsk. Report, Agent K7, the commander said, voice sharp as static. Has the human given useful data? No, Commander, Chiral said, head bowed. He resists interrogation. His mind shields are strong. Then destroy him, Vorsk ordered. The others have already been processed. Chiral hesitated. Processed, meaning? Disposed of, the commander said coldly. You will carry out the final terminations at next cycle's rotation. The War Council demands results. Chiral's jaw clenched behind his mask. And the child? The child? Vorsk's tone darkened. Do not tell me you have kept one alive, Agent. Chiral froze. No, Commander. Of course not. Vorsk's hologram leaned closer, eyes glowing red. Do not forget what you are, Chiral. You are Zyrakian, a shadow, not a savior. Sentiment is corruption. Remember that. The hologram vanished, leaving Chiral alone in the flickering blue light. He stood motionless for a long time. The hum of the ship surrounded him, a sound that had always brought him comfort. But now it felt suffocating. He could see his reflection in the metallic wall, the armor, the insignia, the glowing eyes, all symbols of obedience. But deep inside, something human-like stirred. He thought of the little girl's trembling hands, of Mason's defiance, of his own people's lies. And for the first time in his life, Chiral didn't know which side he was on. Back in the cell, Mason was whispering through the wall again. Ella, you awake? A small voice replied, yes. They're coming for us soon, Mason said softly. You need to be ready. When I say move, you move. Understand? I'm scared, she said. So am I, Mason admitted. But scared just means you've got something to fight for. He heard her sniffle, then whisper, will he help us? Chiral. Mason paused. I don't know. Maybe. Before he could say more, footsteps echoed outside, steady, heavy, metallic. The door slid open with a hiss. Chiral entered, his blue armor dimmer than before. Mason looked up, reading his face. You made your choice yet? Chiral said nothing, just stared at him for a long moment. Then he stepped closer and tapped the console on the wall. The cuffs around Mason's wrists flickered and unlocked. Mason blinked, rubbing his hands. That's one way to say yes. Chiral turned to the wall panel and pressed a sequence. The hidden compartment slid open, revealing Ella, blinking under the sudden light. She looked at Chiral with wide eyes, afraid to move. He spoke softly. Come, we must leave. Now. Mason stood, tense. You're really doing this? Chiral's voice was quiet but firm. If I do nothing, they die. If I help you, I die. The choice is clear. Mason grabbed Ella's hand. Let's move then. Chiral led them through a narrow maintenance tunnel, the walls breathing faintly with alien circuitry. The air smelled like cold iron. Every few steps, Chiral would stop and listen, his head tilting slightly, like he could hear vibrations through the metal. 2 guards ahead, he whispered. Wait. He extended his arm, and a blade unfolded from his armor with a hiss. Mason turned Ella's face away as Chiral moved like a shadow, silent, lethal, efficient. 2 muffled thuds later, the corridor was clear. When he returned, Mason looked uneasy. You didn't have to. They would have killed you both, Chiral said. Mercy has limits. Mason nodded. Fair enough. They moved quickly, the red emergency lights flickering above them. Chiral led them to a door marked by strange glyphs. He pressed his palm to a scanner, and it slid open, revealing a narrow hangar filled with small escape pods. This one, Chiral said, pointing to a pod on the far side. It has minimal tracking systems. You can reach human space if you keep course for 3 cycles. Mason's jaw tightened. You're not coming with us. Chiral hesitated. If I leave, the system will trigger a distress signal. They will know I betrayed them. But if I stay, I can delay them, buy you time. That's suicide, Mason said. Chiral looked at Ella. Better mine than hers. Mason stepped closer. Listen to me. You started this war, you said. Your kind lied to both sides. Maybe this is your chance to fix it, to tell the truth. You come with us, You can help end this. Chiral turned away, conflict burning in his glowing eyes. My place is here. But before anyone could speak, alarms blared through the corridor. A mechanical voice shouted in Zyrakian tones. Fast, harsh, unmistakable. Chiral's eyes widened. They know. The command channel. They've seen the escape bay door open. Then we don't have time to argue, Mason said, shoving Ella toward the pod. Move. Chiral hit the launch controls. The pod doors slid open, engines warming up with a low hum. Then, from the far corridor, shadows began to move, armored figures marching fast, weapons drawn. Go! Chiral shouted. What about you? Mason yelled. Chiral turned, raising his weapon. I will cover you. The first shots exploded down the corridor, blue energy blasts cutting through the metal walls. Chiral returned fire with deadly precision, but there were too many. Mason pulled Ella into the pod and reached out a hand. Chiral, come on. The alien looked back, eyes glowing bright. You'll need me to fly it. He dove inside, hitting the controls. The hatch sealed. Through the small window, Mason saw Zyrakian soldiers flooding the hangar. Chiral gritted his teeth, pressing the thruster. The escape pod roared to life, tearing away from the ship just as explosions rocked the hangar behind them. The stars spun wildly outside. Then a streak of blue light flashed across the window, an enemy fighter locking on. Hold on! Chiral shouted. A blast hit the pod. The hull screamed. Mason wrapped his arms around Ella as they spiraled out of control, spinning toward a frozen moon below. The last thing he heard was Chiral's voice through the roar. I will not let them have you. Then, impact. The world turned white. The crash felt endless. The escape pod screamed as it tore through ice and rock, spinning in blinding white light. Then, silence. For a long time, Corporal Mason Ward couldn't tell if he was alive. The air inside the pod was thin, heavy with smoke. Every breath burned. He tried to move, but the harness held him tight. Somewhere behind him, a small voice whimpered. Mason! He turned. Ella was trembling, covered in dust, but alive. I'm here, he croaked. You okay? She nodded weakly. What happened? Before he could answer, a metallic groan came from the front of the pod. Chiral, the alien spy, was slumped over the control panel, his armor cracked, blue light flickering weakly under his chest plate. Mason unbuckled himself, crawling forward. Hey, stay with me. Chiral stirred, his voice low and distorted. We made impact. The moon's surface. Coordinates unknown. You saved us, Mason said. Chiral's glowing eyes flickered. You humans never stop stating the obvious. Mason almost laughed, but his lungs hurt too much. He checked the readings on the console. The screen was fractured, but one thing was clear. Oxygen, 34%. Temperature, minus 80 degrees Celsius. Signal, detected, Zyrakian patrol incoming. He swore under his breath. They're tracking us. Chiral forced himself upright, his movements stiff and jerky. We cannot stay. The wreck will draw them here. Then we move, Mason said, grabbing Ella's hand. Chiral limped toward the exit hatch and slammed his hand on the release. The door creaked open, revealing a frozen wasteland bathed in the pale light of Saturn's rings. Ice stretched in every direction, jagged and glittering. The wind howled like a living thing. Mason stepped out first. The cold hit him like knives. His breath turned to mist instantly. We need shelter. Fast. Chiral scanned the horizon. There, he said, pointing to a dark shape in the distance, a buried structure half hidden under ice. Old research station. Human design. Mason narrowed his eyes. How do you know that? Chiral hesitated. Because I've studied you longer than you know. They trudged through the snow, Ella between them, holding tightly to Mason's arm. Each step was a battle against the freezing wind. The sky above shimmered with distant auroras, silent and cruel. By the time they reached the building, Mason could barely feel his fingers. The station's metal doors were frozen shut. Chiral raised his arm and fired a pulse from his gauntlet, a burst of blue heat that melted the ice instantly. Inside, It was dark and silent. Old human markings covered the walls, the faded symbol of the Titan Research Corps. Mason felt a pang of nostalgia. This place was ours decades ago. Chiral sealed the door behind them and activated his armor's light. Dust and frost floated in the air. The station's systems were dead except for a faint hum deep below. "This will do," Chiral said. "For now." Mason knelt beside a control terminal, brushing away frost. "If I can reroute power, maybe I can get the heaters online." Chiral nodded, then stumbled, catching himself against a wall. Mason saw it, the deep crack in his armor leaking faint blue fluid. "You're bleeding," Mason said. Chiral shook his head. "Not blood. Coolant. Whatever it is, you're dying." Chiral ignored him and moved toward Ella, who sat quietly, hugging her knees. "She needs warmth," he said. "Your body heat will suffice." Mason frowned. "You're really good at giving orders. You know that." Chiral glanced back. "It's all I've ever known." Mason sighed and wrapped Ella in his jacket, pulling her close. The room slowly filled with the soft hum of old machines coming back to life as power returned. A faint glow spread through the station, weak but enough. Chiral stood by the window, watching the frozen landscape. His armor lights flickered irregularly. "You ever going to tell me why you did it?" Mason asked. Chiral didn't turn. "Did what?" "Help us. Turn against your own kind." The alien's voice was quiet. "Because lies built our empire. For years, I believed humans were monsters, destroyers of worlds. That your kind burned my home to ash. But when I saw your courage, your defiance, I realized something." "What's that?" "That monsters do not protect their young. They do not fight for each other when all logic says to run." Mason looked at him, surprised. Chiral's tone wasn't cold anymore. It was heavy, almost human. "So what now?" Mason asked. "You plan to keep running until they find us?" Chiral turned, his glowing eyes dim. "No, we fight. Together." Before Mason could reply, a sharp beep echoed through the room. He turned to the console. The scanner flashed red. "Incoming signal detected. Zyrakian patrol vessel. Distance, 8 kilometers. "Damn it," Mason muttered. "They're already here." Chiral straightened, drawing his weapon. "We'll hold them off long enough to repair communications. Send your signal. Your fleet may intercept." "You can barely stand," Mason said. "You'll never survive another fight." Chiral looked down at the crack in his armor. "Then I will die for something real." The words hung in the air like frost. Mason clenched his fists. "You're not dying here. Not yet." He scanned the control room, eyes catching a stack of old mining tools, plasma cutters, welding rods, and a few working charge cells. An idea sparked. "You said we fight? Fine, but we do it my way." He started setting traps, rigging the hallway with power cells linked to the old generator. Chiral watched, curious. "Primitive," the alien said, "but effective." "Yeah," Mason said, grinning faintly. "That's the human way." They worked in silence for the next hour. Ella watched from a corner, eyes wide but calm now, sensing a strange trust in both of them, the soldier and the alien who'd once been enemies. Outside, the wind howled louder. The scanner's alarm rose in pitch. Chiral turned to Mason. "They are here." Mason loaded his rifle, checked the charge, and stood beside him. "Then let's welcome them." The first blast shook the outer wall. The lights flickered. Chiral's eyes glowed bright blue, energy building in his palms. Mason took one last breath and looked at him. "If we don't make it." Chiral cut him off. "Then make it count." The door exploded inward in a burst of fire and light. Zyrakian soldiers poured in, shouting in their guttural tongue. Mason fired first, the old rifle roaring. Chiral followed, unleashing arcs of blue lightning that tore through the smoke. The traps detonated in sequence, flashes of orange fire lighting the ice-blue walls. It was chaos, fire, metal, smoke, screams. Mason ducked behind a console, shouting over the noise. "They just keep coming." Chiral stood tall in the center of the storm, his armor cracked and glowing like molten glass. "Then we stop them here." He raised both arms and unleashed a blinding surge of energy that shattered the air. The entire station shook. The Zyrakians fell, their armor burning with blue fire. When the light faded, silence returned. Mason staggered forward. "You okay?" Chiral dropped to one knee, breathing heavily. "I will endure." Outside, the storm raged on, but for the first time, the human and the alien stood side by side, alive, defiant, and united. And far above them, hidden in the cold void of space, a larger ship adjusted its course, heading straight for the frozen moon. The storm outside had raged for hours. Ice hammered against the walls of the ruined station, each gust of wind screaming like a dying machine. Inside, Corporal Mason Ward paced the narrow corridor, boots crunching over shattered glass and burnt metal. The smell of ozone still hung heavy in the air, the aftermath of battle. They had survived. For now, Chiral sat near the main console, armor darkened and cracked, blue light leaking faintly from the wounds. He was still, almost meditating, hands pressed together as if holding himself together by sheer will. Mason knelt beside him. "You need medical help. Whatever that armor's doing, it's not enough." Chiral opened his eyes slowly. "There's no help for me, human. My systems are failing. My kind were not built to bleed. We were built to obey." Mason frowned. "You talk like you're a machine." "Perhaps I am," Chiral said softly. "A living weapon that forgot which side it serves." Mason didn't answer. He turned to the child sitting quietly nearby. Ella was curled up in a blanket made from torn emergency foil, her small hands gripping a cup of melted snow. She watched them both, her face pale but alert. "Is he gonna die?" she asked suddenly. Chiral looked at her, something faint and human flickering behind those glowing eyes. "Not yet," he said. Mason forced a grin. "See, kid? Tough as nails." But even as he said it, he knew Chiral was weakening. The alien's movements were slower, his voice thinner. Every time he spoke, the blue light under his skin dimmed a little more. Hours passed. Mason worked at the communications panel, trying to patch the transmitter with whatever scraps he could find. The system sparked twice, nearly frying his hands. "Signal still blocked," he muttered. "Their jamming field must be orbiting overhead." Chiral turned his head. "They will not give up. I served with these hunters once. They will scour this moon until only silence remains." Mason shot him a look. "Then we better give them more than silence." He gestured to the datapad Chiral had carried, a small, black crystal embedded in a metal frame. "You said this thing could end the war. How?" Chiral hesitated. "It holds truth." "Truth?" "Yes. The Zyrakian High Command falsified the records of first contact. The war began not because humans invaded, but because our leaders needed an enemy. They destroyed our own colonies and blamed yours." Mason froze. "You're saying your people started it, on purpose?" Chiral nodded slowly. "To unite the fractured tribes. Fear is the fastest path to control." Mason rubbed a hand over his face. "And how do I prove it?" "Deliver the crystal to your command fleet. The encryption codes inside will match their archives. Even they cannot deny it." "Assuming I can get a signal through," Mason muttered. Chiral looked at him, voice low. "You must. My betrayal will mean nothing if truth dies, hey?" Mason met his gaze. For a second, he didn't see an alien spy. He saw a soldier, tired, scarred, fighting against the orders he was born to follow. Later, as the storm outside quieted, Mason found Chiral standing at the broken window, staring into the shimmering darkness. "You really believe peace is possible?" Mason asked. Chiral's voice was distant. "Peace is a myth we tell ourselves before the next war begins. But truth can change the direction of the next one." Mason leaned beside him. "You talk like someone who's lived too long." Chiral glanced at him. "I was created before your grandfather was born." Mason blinked. "You're that old." "Our kind do not age. We endure until purpose ends." "And your purpose now?" Mason asked. Chiral's answer was quiet. "To make sure the child lives." Mason looked back at Ella, sleeping in the corner. "You sound more human every hour." The alien's armor flickered faintly, as if responding to emotion it couldn't contain. Perhaps humanity is a virus, he said, almost to himself. One I no longer wish to cure. Suddenly, the scanner on the console beeped. Mason rushed to it. Movement. 2 signatures approaching, fast. Chiral straightened instantly, his senses glowing bright. They have found us. Mason grabbed his rifle. How many? 2 hunters, Chiral said. Scouts. If they confirm our location, the main fleet will follow. Then we stop them before they call for backup. Chiral nodded. Agreed. Mason looked at him. You sure you're up for this? The alien tilted his head slightly. You forget, human, I was built for war. They moved through the station's outer corridor, silent shadows in the cold. Mason could hear the faint hum of engines outside, a patrol craft landing nearby. Snow and dust blew through the cracks in the wall as the door creaked open. 2 Zyrakian soldiers entered, scanning the darkness. Their armor glowed faint green, marking them as trackers. Chiral's voice was a whisper. Their senses will detect the heat of your weapon. Wait for my mark. Mason held his breath. The first soldier stepped closer to the hallway. Chiral lunged. He moved like lightning, a blur of motion and blue fire. His blade sliced through the alien's armor, sparks lighting the corridor. Mason fired at the second, his bullet slamming into the weak point behind the neck plate. The scout dropped instantly. Clear, Mason said, panting. Chiral stood over the bodies, breathing hard. His armor flickered again, more cracks spreading across his chest. Mason noticed. You're breaking apart. It doesn't matter, Chiral said. Their signal beacon must be destroyed. Help me. They pried open one of the soldiers' comm units and smashed it against the wall. The lights died. No transmission, Chiral confirmed. Mason looked at him. You bought us time. Chiral swayed slightly. Time is all that's left. Back in the control room, Ella was awake, shivering. When she saw Chiral's broken armor, she gasped. You're hurt again. Chiral knelt in front of her, his voice soft. Do not fear for me, little one. Fear is for those who have tomorrows. Mason looked sharply at him. Don't talk like that. Chiral turned to him. You will leave this moon. Both of you. I will stay behind and delay the fleet. Not happening, Mason said. You're coming with us. Chiral shook his head. If I leave, they will track my signal. I must remain unseen. My kind do not forgive traitors. Mason clenched his jaw. You're not a traitor, Chiral. You're just finally on the right side. For the first time, a faint light flickered behind Chiral's mask, something close to emotion. Perhaps, he said. He handed Mason the black data crystal. Take it. Protect it as you would a child. Mason took it carefully. You have my word. Chiral nodded once, then turned toward the storm beyond the shattered window. His silhouette glowed against the freezing wind, blue light fading in and out like a dying star. Where are you going? Ella asked, her voice small. Chiral didn't look back, to make sure the hunters never find you. Then he was gone, stepping into the endless white, disappearing into the storm. Mason stood at the window, heart pounding. He's buying us time, he whispered. Ella's hand slipped into his. Will he come back? Mason didn't answer. Outside, lightning flickered across the horizon, blue against white. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the ice. And for the first time since the war began, Mason didn't see an alien enemy. He saw a friend, a soldier who had switched sides, not out of orders, but out of choice. The storm had quieted, but the silence felt wrong. Too still, too cold. Mason Ward stood by the window, staring into the swirling white darkness outside the ruined Titan 9 station. His breath fogged the glass. Somewhere out there, Chiral was walking straight into the storm, back toward his own kind. Ella sat on the floor beside a flickering heater, her eyes wide and silent. Mason knelt next to her, checking the power cells again. We'll have to move soon, he said softly. Where? She whispered. He glanced toward the dead transmitter, then to the black crystal Chiral had given him. To high ground. If I can find a clear line through the storm, I might reach command. Ella nodded, clutching her blanket tighter. But even as Mason spoke, something deep in his gut twisted. The war had taken everything from him. Friends, home, even faith. Yet now, the idea of losing Chiral, an alien he should have hated, felt like losing one last piece of what made him human. Miles away, Chiral moved across the frozen wasteland, his armor flickering faintly like a dying star. The storm clawed at him, but he pressed forward, each step a battle against gravity and pain. His senses pinged softly, multiple Zyrakian signatures detected. They were close. He climbed a ridge and saw them. 3 patrol crafts resting on the ice, engines glowing dim red. Dozens of soldiers moved in formation around a tall, silver figure standing at the center. Chiral froze. He knew that silhouette. Commander Varik, once his superior, now his hunter. Varric's voice echoed through the wind, deep, metallic, and cruelly calm. Chiral of Unit Prime 7, step forward. Lay down your weapon. Your betrayal has been recorded. Your death will restore your honor. Chiral's glowing eyes narrowed. Honor, he said, voice cold. Is that what you call it now? Varik tilted his head. You fought well, spy, until you broke. Until you believed the lies of the lesser species. They are not lies, Chiral said, stepping closer. His chest plate was cracked, leaking blue light. You burned our own colonies. You slaughtered our young to fuel a war no one wanted. The other soldiers murmured in confusion, their armor lights flickering. Varik raised his hand. Silence, he roared. He is contaminated. His mind has been poisoned by human disease. Chiral stopped 10 paces away. No, my mind has been freed. For a long, tense moment, the frozen world held its breath. The wind stilled. Only the faint hum of the patrol ships filled the air. Varric's hand dropped to his weapon. Then you die a free traitor. Mason's communicator crackled faintly, static mixed with faint, distant voices. He froze, leaning close. Oh, power. Coordinates. Varik found him. It was Chiral's channel. Mason grabbed his rifle and looked at Ella. Stay here. Don't move. No matter what happens. Her eyes widened. You're going after him. He hesitated. He went out there to buy us time. I'm not letting him die alone. Before she could answer, he was already out the door, trudging into the storm. On the ridge, the battle began. Chiral moved first, faster than the eye could follow. His damaged armor flared bright blue as he slammed into the nearest soldier, sending the alien flying into the snow. Another came at him from the right. Chiral twisted, grabbed its rifle, and fired point-blank. Varik watched with cold fury. Still you fight for them, he shouted. Chiral spun toward him. No, I fight for what we could have been. Varik charged, drawing his blade, a shimmering staff of black plasma. The two met in a clash of light and metal that lit up the storm like lightning. Sparks flew across the ice. You were my finest creation. Varik bellowed. You were built to serve. I was built to think. Chiral roared back, parrying the strike. You just never wanted me to. Their weapons locked. Energy pulsed through the air, melting the ice beneath their feet. You will die here, Chiral, Varik hissed. Then I die as myself. Chiral broke the lock, pivoted, and drove his blade into Varric's chest. For a split second, silence, then a burst of light threw them both apart. Chiral fell to his knees, panting. His armor's lights dimmed almost to black. Across from him, Varik struggled to rise, dark fluid spilling from his wound. Even now, Varik gasped, you protect the humans. You think they will remember you? You think they will forgive? Chiral looked up, eyes burning. They already have. And then a rifle cracked. The shot came from the ridge above, Mason's rifle. The bullet struck Varric's mask, shattering it. The commander fell, lifeless, into the snow. Chiral turned, stunned. Mason stumbled down the hill, gasping from the cold. Couldn't let you have all the fun, he said through chattering teeth. Chiral managed a faint, flickering smile. You came back. Mason crouched beside him. Yeah, well, you're terrible at saying goodbye. The alien's head tilted slightly, confusion flickering behind his eyes. Goodbye. Mason shook his head. Never mind. He glanced toward the patrol ships. We can use one of those to reach orbit. Maybe signal command. Chiral nodded weakly. Go. Take the child. The crystal. You're coming with me, Mason said firmly. Chiral looked down at his hands, the blue glow fading fast. My systems are collapsing. I will not survive re-entry. Mason's jaw tightened. I don't care. You're still coming. Chiral studied him for a moment. This human who had once been his enemy, now his brother in battle. Humans, Chiral said quietly. You never know when to quit. Mason grinned faintly. That's why we win. They made it to the patrol craft just as the storm began to break. The clouds parted, revealing the vast rings of Saturn glimmering above, silent, endless, and beautiful. Mason helped Chiral into the co-pilot's seat, then powered up the engines. The ship trembled. Systems flickered to life. Hold on, Mason said. The craft lifted off the frozen surface, rising through the storm. Below them, the battlefield faded into shadow. As they reached the upper atmosphere, Chiral turned his head slowly. Mason. Yeah. Thank you. Mason glanced over. For what? For showing me what freedom feels like. The engines roared. The ship broke through the last layer of cloud, light spilling across the cabin. But then, alarms blared. Warning. Incoming signatures. 5 hostiles. Closing fast. Mason swore. They are on us again. Chiral's voice was faint. You must reach orbit. Transmit the data. End this. Mason grabbed the controls. Not without you. Chiral looked at him one last time. Calm, steady, almost peaceful. Then let me do what I was made to do. He reached out, pressing his glowing hand against the ship's console. Circuits flayed, energy surging through the system. What are you doing? Mason shouted. Chiral's voice was soft. Giving you a chance. And before Mason could stop him, Chiral's body dissolved into light, merging with the ship's power core. The engines screamed to life, flooding with blue energy. The patrol craft shot forward, faster than Mason thought possible. Behind them, the Zyrakian hunters exploded in bursts of fire and debris. The ship broke free of Titan's atmosphere and soared into the stars. One man, one child, and the echo of a soldier who had changed sides. Mason stayed out the window, watching the planet fade below. Rest easy, Chiral, he whispered. You earned it. Beside him, Ella looked up. Where did he go? Mason smiled sadly. Home. Outside, the engines still glowed faintly blue, like a heartbeat that refused to die.